I'm very grateful. A very major bank in Malaysia, CIMB, and they have this Artober where they do art festivals, art fair, that they have come on board. Interestingly, today we've got in our presence the owner of the Limkokwing Institution of Education from Malaysia. So we are now engaging with them. How do we engage with their students in there?
Very nice. It looks really nice.
Very nice. Okay,
Very nice. Thank you. Okay, perfect.
I see the AFK collection as much a story of patronage, development, becoming, challenges, but also a love story.
Yeah. What a beautiful museum. This wall.
My name is Shabbir Hussain Mustafa. I'm Senior Curator and Head of Exhibitions at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, and oh, it's only up to here?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's the same, man. Here, this is the piece. So you have to make, and you have to mark this spot here from somewhere as proof.
When my wife said that she couldn't get what she wanted, I felt something very painful within me. And I then decided that that's not going to happen, that we're going to learn how to get what she wants. Because in our age today, being involved in the arts is a lot better than being involved in a lot of other stupid things that I could have got involved in. So now we share passion together. You know, if you do the right things in life, it's great, it's enjoyable, and if you do it well, it has value in so many ways. How great I am.
Do you feel now?
I just wanted a few paintings for the house. He bought me the whole collection.
The idea of patronage is to encourage artists to do great works. I say you do masterpieces and we will oblige you. We engage with the artists throughout the process till today. That we would encourage them. I say, look, you don't worry about the price and you don't worry about the size.
This part is my favorite.
Put it there.
And the movement, to my mind, originates with this really independent thinking that burned through the 80s and allowed for the explosion that you see in 1991. But why do I have to make art in the Western style of formalism? What does formalism mean? And also says the canvas is not sacred. Nothing is sacred, we're in a new era.
And you want it there, we can
Yeah.
swap.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Tiny to Anniketyni midnight song. Yeah. In this little cabinet series.
So literally what we did, what I did, was I would take a lorry and I would go to all the artist homes, their studios, and I literally bought whatever they had.
It's not important to be popular. It's important to do your research and understand and do the right thing.
It's really a pleasure to be with all of you here this evening. And then we're going to have a wonderful conversation with three very, very special people. I just wanted to start off by saying that I first met Aliya and Farouk Khan nearly 2 decades ago. And I was what you may call an apprentice curator. Officially assistant curator, but really apprentice curator with the, I would say, the undefeatable Ahmad Mashadi.
Yes.
And I was working at the National University of Singapore Museum, which is this really incredible place that many of us continue to call home in many ways. And At the time, I was not only interested in Aliya and Farouk's collection and collecting habits, but also drawn to your critical perspectives on Malaysian art. And little did I know that in what began as a conversation would continue, across the years. And over time, I think our exchanges have deepened. I have learned a lot from all three of you, I may say. Zena also over the years, as we've had a few adventures around the world as well, mostly around food, never around art, but also to kind of really learn again and again what came to constitute certain stories, defining moments, what we may call signature works, and also a deep understanding of what constitutes artistic approach and methods. And in a sense, I think as the collection grew, and in all those long conversations, sometimes till 2-3 a.m. in the morning, I think this is what comes out of this entire process. And I'd like to speak to you, all three of you, about this as we go along today. And I've also, over the years, to add, I have loaned works from your collection. Sometimes these were survey exhibitions of certain artists that are also with us here, both in terms of artwork. Many of them are here in the audience, and so I want to acknowledge them for being here all the way from Malaysia. Really, truly, thank you, and it's such a pleasure to meet all of you. But also to say that I think as I continued to loan these works, I came to realize that it was not just the works, but also the relationships that came with the works. And to honor those relationships, to honor those artistic perspectives, and to remain committed, truly, always to the art and to the artist. And so, just to say, it's a tremendous honor to be seated here with all three of you today. And I just want to begin by thanking the Cultural Foundation and everyone at the Cultural Foundation for really making this happen. The exhibition, the event, the dinners, the hosting, the generosity, and the hospitality. And I just wanted to also thank everyone who has come, not just from Abu Dhabi, but from Dubai, from Sharjah and beyond, from Malaysia, from Pakistan, and from very much all over the world. Just thank you for being here. I think it means a lot to be able to share the moment, but also to exchange ideas and thoughts. And so what we really hope to do today is to understand the AFK collection more deeply, to reflect on its approaches and methodologies of collecting. And we spoke a little bit about this earlier, like what is the method here? And there's a lot of thinking around this, and I'd love to kind of go into that. And then also, Zena, to learn from you about how research, writing, and long-term engagement have been built around it. With that, our conversation today will really, and I'll just lay out how we're going to get through it. We're really going to sort of look at the early years of the AFK collection, the early impulses, the need to collect, but also to speak about another word which I truly associate with the AFK collection is patronage. What does it mean, right? In this time, our time, in Malaysian time, if I may call it that, but also in a much more global sense. And then from there, we'll kind of move into questions around scale, right? Because the collection presents that challenge, I think, for collecting, but also for curators, museums, institutions to engage with. So how do we think about scale and the scale of collecting? And then I'd also very much like to hear from Zena really in terms of your scholarship, your writing, your thinking, your dedication into the world, right, of the AFK collection. So I just wanted to kind of begin by asking, and let's really start in the 90s. Let's start from the start. Where are you both in the 90s, and what are you both doing, and how are you both getting on in KL? What happened?
So Farouk moved us from Singapore. He's Singaporean, so I'm a naturalized Singaporean, children are Singaporean, and his business was in Malaysia. So finally he had it driving up and down the highway every week. So he said, we are moving to KL. So we moved to KL and we moved to a newer part of town. And surprisingly, just to get to know that area, we started driving around and we found art galleries. And the National Gallery at that time was what is now the Majestic Hotel. And they had a show of, I think it was either the Saloon Malaysia or the Philip Morris, one of those competitions, which were very predominant at that time. And they were having that show there with the shortlisted and the winners. And I remember going into that show and I saw works that Ahmad Shukri's work called the Diskette series. I had never seen an artwork that was not a painting or a sculpture. And I was blown away. And I think that really triggered the interest. I always loved art from young, I was always, putting up photographs of always decorating. I think there's a human instinct to decorate our walls, right? From caveman and whatever. But I think really that looking at Shukri's Diskette series really kind of got us thinking, let's go into art galleries, let's learn more about it. And that was how it started. But it always starts from like wanting to buy something for the house, right?
And I remember that visit. It was a really interesting visit. And I was quite enamored by Aliya's interest in this very strange artwork. I wasn't very much into the arts then. But one of my principal reasons for moving to KL was to find more time to spend with my children and with my wife. I was a very hardworking young man. I was always traveling. I was always away. So when we moved to KL, I was adamant to spend more time with both these factions of the family. So spending time with Aliya meant I had to go to his art galleries. So I obliged, I tried to be patient, And I started going there. I remember a lot of times she'd come back from these galleries and say, I like this painting. But somebody else bought it. I never get the ones I like. So I said, all right, let me go and sort it out. So I started going to the galleries and I started understanding the system on how galleries function, who they sell to, why they sell to. So from wanting to appease my wife, I started getting more and more interested in the entire dynamics of this art movement. The aesthetics and the creation of artworks was one thing, but from the beginning I identified that there was politics, there was an involvement of money, there was involvement of a lot of other factors, which I always had a general interest in. I always have this interest in socio-political activities, how people function, how they relate to one another. And I'd always been a collector all my life. I used to collect stamps when I was young. I had a very good collection. I collected Marvel comics in the early years of Spider-Man, Fantastic Four. I had the number 1s, the number 2s, the number 3s, And then I collected carpets. And subsequently, I started looking at precious stones. And one day I had an epiphany. I woke up in the morning and I said, what am I doing? All these things are priced at an international level where I could not impact. But I said, this Malaysian art, nobody is looking at it. That art in general also has a value. It has a cultural heritage. It has a community of its own. And it was something also I think we should get involved in because we were new in the environment. So immediately we decided then that we were going to engage with this art scene within Malaysia, which was the beginning of the early stages of the contemporary movement. So once we had the desire amongst us that we were spending time together, we had found a nice thing to look at. We started looking at it in a very serious manner. And then I took on the concept of how do you collect? So then I understood that you have to learn about the various genres within the art movement, that they had abstract expressionists, they had cubism, they had installations, they had sculptures, they had this, that. It is important to collect well from the beginning. A lot of people are very enthusiastic when they buy artworks, and they buy really badly, and then they give up. Yeah. So I've learned that from the very beginning, you want to learn what you're doing. And I made it a point to spend about 2 years researching this entire art movement. And once I understood the concept of the genres, then I would study who is the top artist in the genre of abstract expressionism, who was the top artist in the genre of sculpture, of conceptual art, of installation art, of painting, of figurative, of mixed media. And once we had a basic understanding of that, then we started acquiring. So it was acquiring with a little bit of knowledge, and that knowledge kept growing and growing with time. So through that process, till today, we've applied the same tactics, the same strategy, and then there's a new younger generation that's coming up. And from that, we follow the same strategy, the same tactics to get the thing moving on. And the birth of the AFK basically came along these lines.
I have a follow-up question to this, in relation to the birth of the AFK collection. And I want to kind of push the timeline a little bit further back. And I'm looking to Aliya on this one, because you tell it best. And it's kind of connected to this incredible book that is in front of us here. And it's a book that comes out in 2009. Which is essentially the kind of the first catalog, right, of the collection to date. But 2009 is some time back, 15 years ago. But it has quite a range of works. But there is a dedication here to someone who is very special to Farouk. And Aliya, can you tell this? Can you tell this? And what happens in the 80s?
We had to go to Paris. Farouk's younger brother was very ill, and he was really interested in culture and in design and all of that, carpets and everything. Farouk was a true Singaporean, wasn't interested in that all. So we go to Paris, and we were staying in an area which was near the Museum Picasso. It was a beautiful area. There was an apartment there. His elder brother had the apartment. So we're staying with him, and Liaquat Bhai was really not well at all. But he really wanted us to see Paris because he loved Paris. And one day he said, I really want to take you to Versailles. And I said, yes. I was so excited. And Farouk was like, okay, well, whatever. We dragged him along, and we got into this little car, I don't know, one of those French cars, right? And he kind of obliged us and walked through Versailles, and we've got these pictures where he's looking quite bored. And then, we said, okay. So we spent a very nice afternoon, and Liaquat was really happy that he had shown us around and everything. And on the way back, he said, wait. There's Marie Antoinette's Playhouse, and you have to see that. He refused to get out of the car. He sat in that car, and I was like, what the hell? You have to see this thing. And he said, I'm not going. I'm too tired. And now I can't get him out of a museum, okay? Even the Louvre. He refused to take me to the Louvre. Then we were in the metro, and we are going, and there's a Louvre station. And he says, do you want to see the Mona Lisa? And I said, obviously. It was 4:30. I think the museum was going to close. He took me to the Louvre. We ran around looking for the Mona Lisa. Then he ran me through some galleries. That's my experience of the Louvre in Paris. So that was him in the 80s. And today, he put this whole collection together.
I have two questions, still staying with the 90s. One is, of course, the emergence of Matahati. And also, I think, as the exhibition lays out downstairs, the figure of Fauzan Omar. I know, Zena, you've written about this. It's also there in the thesis of the exhibition here. I wonder who would like to speak to this, because there are, in fact, two entrances to the exhibition. If you start from the east, you end up with Matahati. You start from the west, you start with Fauzan. Can you guys speak about this? Because I think it's important, also in terms of the kind of socio-political moment that Malaysia is in the 90s. And I think this is all entangled and connected in terms of the genesis of the collection. Yeah.
Well, so many times when you're thinking about, and I love that you picked up that you've got the two things, and Amal and I were very conscious about creating two equally strong entrance points, because the entrance impact of a exhibition is so important, and the aesthetics of the works makes that up. But at the same time, you want to be telling a really strong conceptual story. When you're looking at dating the emergence of the Malaysian contemporary movement, to my mind, from my research, it's quite clear. You've got the 1980s as the slow burn of contemporary. And then 1991 is such an impactful year. And I do love that you've opened the book, I don't know if it's on purpose, but to Eng Hui Chu's Black Moon, because there were so many things that happened, and I would say 1991, that really made that impact. And it is Salon Malaysia, where Zulkifli Yusoff wins and is on the cover of Salon Malaysia 91 with the Power series, which I think you and Mashadi showed at NUS once. And then you've got the emergence of the Mata Hati just bursting onto the scene with all this fire and fervor and exemplifying the urbanization of a rural community, and also that really kind of pop Malay rock movement that if you're from Malaysia, you just know instinctively. Also, I think did really well with the Black Moon series. She won awards, her husband Tan Chin Kwan. So a lot of very iconic works made in that year. And even in this show, there's actually some iconic pieces from 1991. But the other side, the West side, and it's just my personal experience that I tend to enter Cultural Foundation from there. So we really wanted to set that up with the origins of the movement. And the movement, to my mind, originates with this really independent thinking that burned through the 80s and allowed for the explosion that you see in 1991. And that's through, I would say, Fauzan Omar is really a leader in this. He, amazing artist, can make works formally in the Western style backwards and forwards and sideways. But he asked himself, coming from Kelantan, he said, okay, I've studied all this formalism. I've gotten a scholarship. I've gone to America. I know all of this. But why do I have to make art in the Western style of formalism? What does formalism mean? You know, and he's really thinking about it. Does it exist in the Malay cultural canon as well? And he actually goes off and does this research project where he looks at formalism within Malay cultural heritage practice. And Kelantan has, as you know, a great batik tradition and silversmithing, etc. And he finds that those ideas of formalism, you know, from color, composition, perspective, etc., that they exist within the forms of making there in Kelantan. So he applies that and also says the canvas is not sacred. Nothing is sacred. We're in a new era. And that leads to the production of layer series. So it's very important, I think, to start the whole show. Amal and I, and even my parents, we all felt that starting with that first layer series work, where he cuts and slices and restitches the canvas, really sets the stage for that shift in society, which then burns through the 80s and explodes in the 90s.
I wanted to kind of bring Farouk into this. And Farouk, you're also living through this moment whilst you're collecting.
There's no written documentation. Nowhere I could reference things through the academics, because the written word in that part of the world was only restricted to the modernist movement. There was no recognition of the contemporary movement while there was this beginning of this process. These artists were all hard done, but they were struggling to survive and to do whatever it was, you know. So when Zena was talking about the development of Fauzan and his layer series, he held a show at the Australian Embassy. And throughout that show, he would go back to university every day and everybody would ask him, did you sell anything? His work was so progressive that everybody thought it was ridiculous. So, and at the end of the show, he didn't sell anything. And he was a little bit, he doesn't take rejection well. So he took all the works back home. He kept one aside and he burned the rest of it. And the one piece that we have here today is the piece that survived the fire. Most important, you have to realize what the artist had to go through during those periods in a very hierarchical society where people were more fascinated with watercolor paintings of buffaloes, of landscapes, of mountains and rivers. The shift into But Fauzan then influenced another generation, which was his Matati boys. They were in their early 20s and they were very adamant to look at art in a different manner. And like Zena used the word, they exploded on the scene and they came out with major works. But again, in that process, while they were doing all that, the patronage again was lacking. By the time I had finished, I was doing my research and I was engaging with what I call the underground curators of the movement. The people who were not working in institutions, people who were not working in museums, but people who had very deep art knowledge and had the relationship with these people. And I was drawing this primary source of information through my sitting with them at night, drinking tea together, what we call teh tarik, drinking teh tarik with them and having all these stories. I was constantly meeting artists and various curators to understand what this movement was about. And when I understood it, and then I realized that lack of patronage was going to cause this movement to sort of disappear, that we then made the decision that was the direction we were going to go into, and we were going to provide patronage to the contemporary movement. So literally what we did, what I did, was I would take a lorry and I would go to all the artists' homes, their studios. And I literally bought whatever they had. You know, once we had developed that narrative, we had developed that timeline, we had developed the mythology, we thought that it was worth it to then provide the patronage to this very talented group of people who I felt could do a lot for society if given the patronage. So we created that environment, and that environment had a momentum of its own. As we engaged in this, other people then also, hey, let me look at this. Then institutions got nervous. They said, oh, let me look at this. So the momentum had a movement of its own. And they started picking it up, you know. So to a point today where I think it's a very successful movement. I think we were lucky to be there at that time. We engaged with the artists throughout the process till today. That we would encourage them. I say, look, you don't worry about the price and you don't worry about the size. The idea of patronage is to encourage artists to do great works. I say, you do masterpieces and we will oblige you. So then the artist had a little bit of confidence. Because otherwise they have to think, how do I feed my children? How do I buy milk for my kids? You know, we took away a lot of that fear from them, and that allowed them to engage in their artistic expression. And I think we were very instrumental in creating an environment that allowed for the creation of these works that you are seeing today.
And I'd like to kind of go a little bit more into the idea of patronage. Just as you described, Farouk, patronage is not collecting per se. Patronage is being dedicated to the artist over a number of years and continuing in many ways to drive that practice. Sometimes one can be critical of the practice too. So it's not just, a kind of to put it very crudely, a kind of a blind loyalty, right? It's built on conversations,
blind
debates.
Yeah,
right?
That's a good word for that.
Can you speak a bit about this?
Well, I'll give you an example of blind loyalty with the artwork that is hanging out there. It's a huge piece by Ahmad Fuad Osman, and it's called Karawan. He was doing a residency in Bali with my elder brother at that time, and he was quite fascinated with the things that were going on in Bali. And then in between, he had taken a trip to Europe. When he visited Europe, he was struck by the fact that the Europeans were very adamant to glorify the religion of that region through paintings. The Renaissance style painting, and when he went to all the museums, that was all very starkly clear to him. And he thought that he came from a region where it was a multicultural society, where there were so many religions. I mean, Asia is so strong in their religions, the religion of Islam, the religion of Buddhism, the religion of Hinduism. And he thought, why don't I immortalize our religion through art as well? And when he thought of that, he thought, I have to do it in a big way, as how I saw the Renaissance artists were doing it, Now, while I was talking to him about this in his studio, there was this empty canvas on his wall that measured 14 feet by 10 feet. So while I was talking to him, I then asked him, what is this canvas for? And there wasn't a drop of paint on that canvas. And he said, this is going to be my first work into this direction. That work is the last piece on the end there. And as he finished his statement, I said, all right, I'm buying it now. So I bought that canvas without a single painting, because I thought the idea was so fantastic, that we should encourage them. And he was so brave about it. He had this huge canvas on his wall. So I like the enthusiasm of people who are brave, people who want to look into things in a different way, people who want to introduce new things, So it was the characteristics of both Aliya and I that we were brave, we were adventurous, and on hindsight, it has worked out beautifully. I'm thankful that we are both very irresponsible and that we do things in a very crazy manner, but which then allows for things to happen in a better manner.
Talking about this leap of faith, so to speak, right? In collecting, there is always this kind of tension, if you may call it that, between aesthetic preferences and valuations, right? How you ascribe value to something, right? In the case of the Fuad painting, for instance. Can you speak a little bit about this? Yeah.
I always use the example of music. My first love was always music. I can't play any instrument. I can't even clap on the right beat. But I have a fascination for the music from the 60s and the 70s. And I actually do art history on the music from that region, And I was always fascinated by the fact that you had critical musicians and you had musicians for the day. So I give the example of Britney Spears, who would survive for 5 years, 6 years, showing her body, showing here, showing there, trying to sell a record. And when that era is over, she disappears from the face of the earth, And then you had somebody like Eric Clapton, who had come up with the Yardbirds in 1962, and then went on to form Cream, the supergroup, first supergroup that was so major, but only lasted for 2 years. And then he went on to form with Derek. So he did all of this thing. And eventually he said, I'm going solo. And in 2020, he was still playing guitar in concerts and selling records and doing nothing. So you wanted to look for the artist who had the critical structure within him. Who would have thought that the Rolling Stones in 1963 would be doing a sellout concert in 2025? A group of geriatrics trancing across that stage and selling concerts, sold-out concerts of 250,000 people. So when we're looking at an artwork, we have to look in context of that. So when you're looking at something aesthetic, yes, you can look at a nice buffalo, you can look at a nice landscape, you can look at all of this. And then when you're looking at the critical, like when people look at Shooshie's work, they say, oh, it's so scary. But in 20 years' time, it is no longer scary. It has a way of becoming softer through time. She is 20 years ahead of the people within her society. Once you start to understand that, you then start appreciating who the critical artists are, and they're not the one going to show their body to sell a painting. They're going to express themselves in the way they believe that what they need to express has to look that way. And if you catch on with these brave artists, you'll have a collection that's going to be something you're going to be very proud of through time. So today when people ask me, how in the world do you have 40 Shooshie paintings? Because nobody else in Malaysia bought her. And today she is with Tomio Koyama in Japan, doing all kind of wondrous things, So how do you explain all of these things? So again, it comes back to, as I said, maybe it's the act of irresponsibility again between us. That we had beliefs in things, in the fundamentals of the art, rather than just purely on the aesthetic, even though I do say aesthetic is important. Don't undermine aesthetic. Everything is important. So no one thing is important. You can't just look at it from the, you have to look at it from everything.
Thinking about this underlying logic and structure of each practice here, right? And this is a structure that you have traced over 3 decades, right? I wanted to sort of draw out 2 other works. We've spoken about Karauhan, which is really the work here, the large painting just at the entrance. You can see it here. But 2 other works in the show, and there are, I mean, we could be here till 3 a.m. talking about the individual pieces, but just 2 works. And I'd like to bring Zena and Aliya into the conversation. Also because in a sense, they are pivotal works in the collection, but also I think within the broader formation of a story of contemporary Malaysian art. Aliya, if you could speak about Pilihan, and Zena, perhaps if you can speak about Pandita, and also with a little bit of background of who the 2 artists are and what makes them relevant also in this configuration as we are seeing downstairs.
So Pilihan is by Hamir Soib, and he is one of the Matahati boys. And we were invited to, somebody gave us a flyer of his show. He did a solo show in 2005. It was called Pameran Tunggal. And I think he just decided that he'd had it with everybody because he was struggling to be practiced fully sell as an artist. So they were all working as backdrop painters or, everything. So he set up his own show in his very big, he had a big warehouse space where it was his studio. And somebody gave us a flyer and we, of course, got lost. It was before Google Maps and everything. So we found the place. And we went in there and there were, how many works, Anna? 7 works. He had done large scale works. And I went in, I was just blown away by the size and the scale and the technique and everything. And I said to Farouk, I remember walking around and thinking, these works will be collected by the gallery because they are museum-sized scale works. Obviously, that didn't happen. And Pilihan is quite important in our collection, in the journey of our collection, because it is very big. It's 24 by 10 feet. It's a huge painting. We at that time lived in a 3,000 square foot apartment. Obviously, we couldn't bring it into our home. But Pilihan in Malay means choice. The choices one makes in life when you have to make choices. His underlying theme at that time was there was a lot of conversation about money politics in Malaysia at that time. So he was talking about a broader sense of society, that if you hold on to your roots, your fundamentals, you can grow strong like a tree. If you succumb to, greed and avarice and all of that, you become like the donkey that's thrown out of the thing. So it's the hamar. But it also comes down to the choice that we decided when he got rejected he was having a conversation at that time, and however, we decided to buy that work. And that was a choice we made. Even though we had no space to bring it in, we couldn't install it in our house, but we thought it was so important. It was like, I'd never seen a painting like that. It was so huge and important. Me and Farouk both decided we couldn't let it go. We had to patronize him to buy that work. And so that led to us building, okay, what do we do now? We now decided, okay, if we're going to buy this, we are going to buy large scale works. After that, there was no stopping us. We stopped thinking about size and all of that. Okay, we are going to find storage. That's how once we bought Pilihan, there was no stopping us. Then we went on to that journey of, not looking at our house as a space to just install works, but to be a greater, just buy what are critical and important works.
The work forced us into creating storage space. So we then looked at warehouse spaces and we realized we couldn't house all the works at home. So we bought or rented storage space that we could now house any kind of artworks, which then opened the door to conceptual art, which then opened the door to installation art, opened the door to sculpture. I mean, all of a sudden it opened the door to a whole new dimension. And I thought, okay, well and good, it's fair enough. You have storage space, you can play the game differently. But Aliya had other plans. She said, look, the home is not big enough. So she said, let's buy the apartment next door. Let's pay the guy whatever it is. We'll buy that and I'll renovate it so we can hang big artworks. So I had to go ahead and buy the house next door. And I got a scolding one day for coming back and trying to bargain with the guy, So then I had to go back and apologize and pay him his price. And now we've got walls that are 25 feet. We've got walls that are 20. So all of a sudden, we can now also hang. So your own practice and your own journey comes along with a lot of things. If we had not made that choice, we would not have gone into installation art. We would not have gone into museum quality art. We had not gone into museum size art. So that it's a journey, is an organic growth. It happens by itself and it keeps developing. And as long as you can afford it, you just go on. Because it's something we enjoy more than anything else.
That really long wall we have in the house, which you made actually to hang Pilehan in Malaysian art. Like, I think the nickname for that wall is Hamir's Wall. Especially if you're Hamir Soib, he calls it Hamir's Wall. And it's really interesting to see other... You can see Anniketyni smiling. Because Anniketyni took him on and made a 16-foot wood and resin sculpture that took up almost permanent residence for a few years there. But it's really interesting because it's a wall in which there's a lot of depth to see it, and you can put up different things. And also we've hung the backdrop of installations there as well. And it's nice because you get to live, for me it's nice, and I think for you guys, we get to live with different aspects of work and different types of work and sit there every day and discuss it. Like we do that every morning, right? Now we make the grandkids do it with us. But that also, I think that storage is interesting because, and I'm obviously the child, so I was quite young and watching them do this. And to see that kind of inclusion of installations into the collection's been really important. And I'm speaking not as the collection curator or as your child, but like as a member of Malaysian society and a person who loves art. Because if you don't, for artists, and it's something everyone has to remember, I remember being told this at the Royal College, you have to create a system in which artworks can be preserved for posterity. And I think Pandita is an example of that. It's a really important installation which shows the method through which Zulkifli Yusoff, who's a very important installation artist in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, creates his installation. So it starts from that basis of research and then moves into the aesthetics, and space becomes a big important consideration.
Can you speak a little bit about Zulkifli Yusoff and also the Pandita installation in particular? And a little bit about his methods, because I think this goes back to the conversation on museum pieces, scale, but also I think what Farouk mentioned, that line of thinking that this is a body of work that will evolve over 3, 4, 5, 6 decades. And Pandita is in a way a very important moment in the development, right, of Zulkifli Yusoff since the 90s. And you mentioned the Power series from the 1990s as well.
Well, it's interesting because they have quite strong aesthetic and conceptual similarities. But with Pandita, he starts from that basis of research, where he's looking at a very important linguist and educator, Zaba, who gave a speech. I listened to the whole speech, and it's about the role of women in the post-colonial environment of Malaysia. And he transcribes the speech prints them onto sheets of canvas, which he then prints, then slices, then builds up over these floor and wall panels, and also wraps around furniture and household items. And other pieces also have information on very successful Malaysian women, heads of banks, doctors, etc. What it does is it does several things simultaneously that Zulkifli is very interested in. It starts with the research of Malaysian history. It thinks about it not through an opinion, but through the creation of critical space where audiences are invited to reflect on their history. And they're invited to engage with it and to know their own history. So that then takes the Malaysians into a point as an ex-colony where we're thinking about and writing our own narratives and our own stories rather than just accepting preordained, very old colonial narratives.
I personally rate Zulkifli Yusoff as a genius. I mean, he is an artist par excellence. From him, I've come to understand the importance of formalism within an artist who goes into conceptual art. Now, we're going into this environment that we're in today where everybody wants to be an artist. Everybody who's got a computer, everybody who knows how to do things, even AI now wants to be an artist. But if you go back and you understand the importance of formalism and the skill of developing through training your formalistic skills. So whenever he does an installation, I notice there's an aesthetic sense of it that I find most conceptual artists don't have the ability to deliver. So whenever I see an installation of his, I'm always struck by the fact that the beauty of the work, is as great as the intricacies of making that work. And then I'm looking at this whole new young generation of wannabes who are creating all this installation art, and one is more crazy than the other. And then you understand that they've never developed the skills of formalism. And from that, you then go within the point whether it's art science or it's art subjective. That without the training, you cannot develop the kind of work. So the function of art schools, the function of training in formalism, all this then you've come to realize is very important. And Zulkifli is one of those chaps who, God has given him this gift. And as much as I've traveled in so many places, I've struggled to find a conceptual artist or an installation artist that comes near to the kind of works that he does.
Just to shift the focus slightly, as we speak about the work, as we speak about the exhibition, as we speak about the very act of patronage and collecting, I wanted to ask you both about the challenges in collecting. Can you both speak about this? Over the last 30 years, as the collection came into formation.
Well, the first thing you have to do is ensure that you get your wife's permission. What you're going to do. Now, this would not be possible if we were not a team. I think it's something I have to express, because it's something you're bringing in at home every day, something you're living with. It's something where your resources go into. So there must be the harmony at home for you to do that. So I'm fortunate that I found a soulmate, or a soulmate found me, that we were able to have a shared passion and this megalomania idea of creating not just a collection, but a collection that represents a national heritage. That you have created the narrative of the contemporary movement of a society. You are access to acquiring the works of the first generation of the contemporary movement in itself, The question was?
The challenges.
So the main challenges that come from having the vision, having the idea, having the wise consent, I would say then comes with your financial resources. Now, it's very important when you're collecting, and I say this to people, that you can collect in any form. You can be a collector of photography. You can be a collector of print works. You can be a collector of sketches. The idea is that when you collect it really well. If you have a good body of sketches of all the various artists within the society of that time, that body of work becomes very important. If you have a good collection of the photographers from your period, it becomes very important. If you have a good collection of printmakers. So depending on the resources that you have, so one of the biggest challenges for me was always to look for money so that I could buy artworks. I remember I was thinking when I was young and I'd buy social provident, social security, CPF they call it, that when I reach the age of 55, I'll have $1 million. Oh, I said, wow, I'm going to retire then. So when I reached the age of 55, I went to the CPF and they paid me the money. And I found within the next 3 months, that was just enough to cover my art bills. So what was planned for my retirement went totally, into the collection as well. So it's the level of commitment that you want to make. But on this, I say it is in some way being a private collector, you understanding you're using your own money. Your leeway for mistakes is not much. You're not an institution. You cannot go back to the government for another 300 million that I want to blow away. Whatever that you use, you have to use it wisely. Because one of the most important things you learn in economics is what they call opportunity cost. So if somebody in 1964 bought a work of Latif Mohidin for $150 at that time. Today, that work from the Pago Pago series sells for $2 million. Now, if somebody from 1964 bought an artwork for $150 and he bought it badly, that work is still $150. So the opportunity cost is that 2 million, the difference in that price. So in art, you find that this opportunity cost is a very important factor because it is very expensive to make a mistake. So a lot of people or a lot of institutions, a lot of corporates, they buy the art, they say, oh, okay, never mind, it's got no value, but they're not looking at the lost opportunity cost. When you bought badly, there's no value within the collection. And they should be calculating that opportunity cost.
If Aliya wants to add anything.
I just want to say one of the challenges was, it's in his article, due to the failed curatorial process, which made us very unpopular. I mean, the reason we have the collection is because, for whatever reason, whatever was happening and emerging at that time, the curators of that time, whoever were writing down the narrative of that region, they failed to recognize it. And that's why we have the collection. The museums of the region, Malaysian and Singapore and all, they just didn't collect. So also going against the grain of what is written, what is accepted, what should be we were told when we started collecting that you don't have to do any research, just buy the booklet from the National Gallery and just buy one artist. And I remember sitting with Farouk in a cafe when this gentleman told us, and he was a senior board member of the National Gallery. Farouk looked at me and said, I should just buy a gun and shoot myself in the head. So he's very adamant on research. And I think that's why we have the collection. It does present a challenge because you're going against what the whole collective is saying is the right way. But you are saying, no, this is wrong, and this is actually the narrative. So I think that was a big challenge for us. And we've stuck to our guns. We've never given up. It's not important to be popular. It's important to do your research and understand and do the right thing. Being popular is not important. 30 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, this is the collection we have. So I think it was difficult to be unpopular, but whatever,
Zena, I wanted to ask you, in light of this, there is a lot of dedication and care that you have shown to the collection in terms of its documentation, in terms of the interviews, in terms of the gathering of the primary sources. I mean, the website is, I would say, a facet of this care. Can you speak a little bit about this and how you've kind of worked your way through all these narratives, essentially, and stories?
Well, it actually goes back to something Dad said earlier, which is when they started, that it was all primary information. Nothing existed, and you had to constantly go out and look for that information yourself if you wanted it. And I think I've been very conscious that exists in their minds, their experiences, and also the minds, experiences, and stories of the artists. Let's say Fauzan Omar or Yusof Ghani or, the Matahati boys or Zulkifli Yusoff. And you like to think people will live forever, but mortality is a thing. So how do you get that information out and put it down? So there's been a period of, I'd say, since about 2013 of sitting and talking to people and recording all that information. And I've got it written in books and digital archives and all sorts of things, which I should really organize a bit better. And it also becomes information you yourself know, and then you start writing that down. So there is the thing of and on the website where every artist has their biography and all the information about them, their CV. We've also put all of our publications, which is based on kind of more critically minded research thinking, available for download on the publication, on the website. But also we have an Instagram account where we do something else, which is artwork biographies, which I think are really important. So you have an image of an artwork and then a biography about that artwork. Why was it made? How was it made? And when you do this over a period of over a decade, you come up with a body of writing and thinking that if you see a work in the collection, you're able to, as an audience member, go back and look at it and get information, and that creates that base of stepping stones, and becomes a window from Malaysian art to the world.
So what I want to add on that, the importance of documentation mustn't be undermined. If museums are going to do shows, it must be accompanied with documentation. This documentation serves as research sources for future generations. You have to understand the future generation, they come into the area, they are blind, they don't know what's happening. So if there are documents that they can access to, they can then explain what happened throughout the various periods. When we were collecting, there was literally no documentation because society was only writing about the modernist movement. And we said, my God, how are we going to collect contemporary if we don't have anything to read and anything to learn from? So one of the things that we did as the collection developed, we financed this book, and it cost me a lot of money. But I said I'm going to do this so that future researchers do not go through the nightmare that I've gone through of sitting with underground curators. It was a pleasure sitting with underground curators, sitting with writers, sitting with all things. It was the last bastion of primary source of information because time will pass and they will not be around anymore. Then subsequently, we are looking at secondary sources of information. So it is important to have sources from the primary factors and to document them and to keep them all. I remember a guy was telling me that a painting in China is sold for 20, 30 million. But he said, what was fascinating, Farouk? He said, that time catalogs were one-page A4 paper. And he said, if you have a catalogue from that show that provides the provenance to this artwork, that A4 paper is worth $1 million. So all of this adds to provenance. If we want our society to get somewhere, we have to provide the provenance of our artworks. Without the provenance, your values and all that. So I ensure whenever I do an art show, whenever I do anything with the galleries in Malaysia, I insist they produce documentation. So when I'm not around, so I've done this for my children, so they've got the provenance of the collection. Then subsequently, I've drilled it into all the galleries. We have to produce documentation. So down the road, we will be seen as a sophisticated society that produced academic, intellectual thoughts that provided provenance, hence value for the artworks. So I'm very hopeful we will get a good document from this art fair, from this exhibition as well.
Thank you. As the moderator, I get to ask the last question. So forgive me, but I promise you it's a good one. I see the AFK collection as much a story of patronage, development, becoming, challenges, but also a love story. And can you both of you just speak a little bit about that? And I think we'll end with that.
Yeah, I remember one day, I say this, I got involved because of her and wanting to spend more time with her. I didn't realize I was going to use all my resources. But I remember one day she came home from an art show and she would go with her friends. I couldn't go to all the shows. And she said, I really like that painting and I couldn't get it. I really like... it's the same as now when my 3-year-old grandson comes to me and he wants a toy. And I say, come, let's go to the toy shop. And the mother will say no, and my wife will say no, I hack them. I take him to the toy shop and I buy him whatever he wants. When my wife said that she couldn't get what she wanted, I felt something very painful within me. And I then decided that that's not going to happen. That we're going to learn how to get what she wants. And it was important to me because it was something that she wanted. And fortunately for me, it was a good thing to be involved in, because in our age today, being involved in the arts is a lot better than being involved in a lot of other stupid things that I could have got involved in. So now we share passion together, as what somebody did recently. They printed this thing, from passion to portfolio. This magazine wrote about us. They put us in the front cover, and the title that she put, taking their passion to a portfolio. So it's, if you do the right things in life, It's great, it's enjoyable, and if you do it well, it has value in so many ways. You know? Yes, yes. How great I am.
Do you feel now?
I just wanted a few paintings for the house. He bought me the whole collection.
Thank you.
And I put in her name.
My name is first.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And have a good evening.